Yeah, good afternoon, and thank you for this invite for addressing all of the participants on the journey from IA to AI. During the course of today's discussion, I would like to outline a step-by-step process of creating a foundational approach to creating a strong audit framework within any institution. And then how do we move to artificial intelligence in a step-by-step manner is what we will discuss. So we'll take a 1,000-mile journey, a step by step, is as the famous Chinese proverb says. The views I express here are that of my own and do not reflect the views of management of Sumeru or that of ICICI Bank, where I worked for nearly a quarter of a century. The first step to towards audit is to make an audit plan by understanding the business that we are in. And we need to also understand risk in those businesses. In fact, whenever there is a discussion about risk, I like to quote this famous incident. And it starts by saying, she is unsinkable. The vessel could be cut into halves, and each half would remain afloat indefinitely. The non-sinkable craft has been created. If I were in a physical meeting, I would have asked to raise hands, but I must give the answer. This was the quote by Captain of Titanic. And for us, the business is like Titanic, and risk assessment is knowing where the iceberg is. And therefore, that is the element of expertise we as auditors have to bring in. And our risk assessment ability has to know what are the controls in place so that businesses avoid iceberg. And this particular understanding of business should be at par with our business colleagues itself. And that is how we will have mutual respect for each other. Therefore, we should know what is the business plan, what is on the annual during the year, during the quarter, and we plan accordingly to test the controls that mitigate the risks. And that becomes the audit observation if the controls fail. And in this manner is how we will dovetail a plan at the beginning of the year, which we will follow across the year. This is what is business and risk assessment in internal audit. And if there is a scenario that you don't have the details of the business itself as independent internal auditors, then that itself is an observation for you to start with, because it is our role to know everything that the business is about to plan or do. And this is how we will create respect for ourselves in the organization. Because when, in my experience, I go to a business head and I'm able to converse in the same with the same kind of authority that he would on his business, is when we will earn respect of our business colleagues. When we look at ourselves and try to position ourselves within the organization, I believe this is fundamentally a very strong thing to do. I always like to call ourselves the internal auditors as doctors on call. The reason is that all of us go to a doctor only to be told what is wrong with us, surprisingly. But when it comes to the internal audit function, we don't like to be told by the internal auditors what is wrong with us. But think of it, if we are internal auditors and we change our positioning to become doctors on call, then indeed the businesses will approach us to share with us many things which they otherwise wouldn't. Of course, this is easier said than done. The question is, how do you position ourselves as doctors on call? I would say that there is a three-step approach to this. First, whenever we conduct an audit, we must ask for an opening meeting where we explain very transparently the scope of audit, the risks we see in the business, and the controls we expect to test. This transparency will build mutual respect and trust amongst us. And so this is step one, to go to the business in the beginning and outline what is it that we will check and to what depth we will check. The second and more important one is to create a culture of self-disclosure within the business. We must give them 48 to 72 hours from that meeting, which I referred to as step one, and give them adequate time to make self-disclosures. And you must assure them that even if the self-disclosures are of high risk, wherein they have found a problem and they are self-correcting it, you must assure them that we will indeed report it, but it will be reported as a finding by the business itself and not as an internal audit finding. And we will take it to the higher authorities only to track and fulfill our role as internal audit, not to find fault with the business. In fact, such businesses which make self-disclosures of finding high-risk items should be rewarded and should be rated accordingly. So this is the second aspect to become the doctor in our journey. The third is that we should make our recommendations palatable to the business itself. You know, if we go to a doctor and they will find so many things wrong with us in our reports, and they will find us that, oh, we are overweight, and they will suggest that, you should starve. That's what you should do so that you get back to normalcy. Can you imagine that if we make a recommendation like that to business? So the recommendations have to be palatable and have to mitigate the risk. Our approach should be look at the risk and how is it best mitigated. And that is what will make respect for us in their eyes. And therefore, ultimately, we'll become the doctors on call. So this is an important and interesting way to position ourselves within an organization. The third aspect is to have clear reporting lines. The recommended approach of reporting lines is to have a straight line reporting to the audit committee and the MD of the institutions so that there is absolute clarity that we are independent of business. And there should be direct access to the audit committee chair. That's an ideal scenario. Most organizations may not have it. In banking institutions, this is common play. So we must look at how we progress an organization to have this done in a formal way, and this should form part of our audit charters, which is the guiding pillar for any audit framework. The second aspect of reporting and teams is that we need to modernize internal audit. Therefore, we need to have technologists, data scientists, and auditors as a combination along with functional experts. So this four team have to come and join in audit to make a fulfilling audit experience for any organization. The fourth element is to ha have, sorry, am I echoing?
No, Rajesh,
Yeah,
you can.
it's fine. Yeah. The fourth element is that how do we create our first steps to create technology in internal audit? You know, the aspect when we audit businesses, we always would want to recommend that you should have a proper system which will outline how to do your business in a very systematic way so that it is firstly, it becomes a systematic approach to do business and is auditable. Similarly, there is no reason that we as internal audit also don't adopt a workflow. In fact, a workflow is a must to be adopted because it will create consistency in approaches because workflows offer us templates, it will offer us checklists for each area, it will have observations in each area, and it will enable report writing in the workflow itself. And finally, and most importantly, it will enable analytics for retrieval of information. So fundamentally, when we are moving towards AI, as we said, is our aim and goal, and this presentation is about that, we need to create a fundamental base for us by looking at workflows in every aspect of audit. And the workflow should be such that it creates an end-to-end framework for audit to be done. The second aspect is that we need to, as independent people in the organization, have direct access to the data of the organization. We need to create the teams. We need to spend resources. Initially, the journey could be tough because we may ask managements to uh, allow us to hire data scientists. But in the initial phase, if the data warehouse is existing and we have data scientists in those departments, we can indeed use them. Obviously, their independence will be lesser than having it in our own teams. But the journey should begin even with data scientists from the data warehouse itself to retrieve data and give it to us. But the goal should be that we ourselves recruit data scientists so that we can query the data ourselves in the manner we want to analyze the risks and plan our audits in a more structured and in-depth manner. Finally, the advantage of having data scientists is that we can institute robotics in audit, and that will be the last stepping stone before we can actually move to AI. Robotics is nothing but writing a code to automate certain tasks that we may have in audit. We can do several of these robotics within internal audit. If you take any aspect of any business which is repetitive in audits, we can easily write code provided the data is already existing. And that should be the migration step towards moving to AI. Having put in place a technology architecture, which is a workflow and direct access to data warehouse, the surprising question is, what if I haven't even started with a data warehouse? Of course, there is this question that it is possible that some organizations will be using Excel or like sort of softwares rather than having a formal data warehouse. If that be the case, we don't need to worry. I think in our experience, we all know that when Excel was launched, there was a restriction of 64,000 rows. And some 20 years back, uh, whenever we reached about 5,000 to 10,000 rows, we used to find it risky and therefore suggest automation in some form or the other. Similarly, even today, though Excel can handle a million rows in the new versions, but still it doesn't have a structure which will create a workflow like output. And therefore, even if we are in Excel, we should move towards making a system and adopting a workflow either internally or externally, as the case may be. But a workflow is a must as to move directionally and make audit a systematic process, a consistent process. The fifth element is that, when we go through audit, we have to leave behind the aspect that we will be able to check 30 samples and be happy what has happened in those 30 samples and our ability to say that, okay, there were 5 errors in 30 samples and therefore there's a very high risk. Imagine a scenario that we are able to query the entire database and therefore get outputs on the entire database itself to know what is the quantum of risk. Just to give an example, there is a PAN, which is PA, and the permanent account number, and which is the tax identifier in India. If we end up using a query wherein we want to know how many PANs are not populated in the accounts which we have. So say if we have 3 million accounts and we find that we query the whole 3 million and get an output that only 3,000 PANs are not populated in that 3 million database, we can adequately define what that risk should be of such a finding because it's minuscule in the context of 3 million accounts. And that is the power of moving to 360-degree auditing, wherein you get a full understanding of the depth of the problem and the risk that it has for the organization. And unless we move to technology, we just will not be able to get this kind of incisiveness in our observations. The sixth element, of course, is that while we plan all of this in macro, we have to go out there and do the audit. And in order to do the audit, one has to be meticulous in doing and respecting that particular audit. Because if I am running the business and you come to me as an auditor, I would like that respect even in my audit. And that's how a business person thinks. So if we give it adequate respect by setting up a meeting at the highest levels, by looking at self-disclosures as we discussed to become a doctor, and we commit to timelines from both sides. That will be the micro aspect of audit when we actually go and deliver in given timelines and report back to our reporting authority, which, as we discussed, will be most likely the audit committee. So this kind of a micro planning for each audit also will add finally to the brand value of being a doctor, because we are concerned about how our business is run. Therefore, we spend time with them to understand. We take inputs from them in a systematic, formal setup so that they also know that we mean business in the given time. And no better person to understand that we mean business than business itself. So that's the element of micro planning which has to get into a particular audit that we may take up. The seventh and final step is that often we as auditors will end up making everything an issue. You know, we'll find all the risks that are there and try to make everything an issue. And then it gets bogged down. The method which I would suggest is that first we should, whenever we are looking at starting an audit, we must agree with the auditee, which will be the business or operations, that what will we quantify as very high risk, medium risk, or low risk. And once that agreement is reached, you will find that the audit process itself becomes very smooth. We will not have any issues with business later on in debating that something is very high risk and they believe it is only medium risk. So this agreement or pre-agreement becomes very important, and automatically anything which is found which is very high risk will get reported to the highest authority, which in the audit framework is the audit committee of the board. And that framework needs to be built in a very precise and sensitive manner to the business, where they can also give inputs. Obviously, we as auditors will exercise the veto power, which is outlined in our audit charters respectively. So these 7 steps which I outlined, that we should have an audit plan which will outline the business and the risks and the controls. Second, our positioning as doctors. Third, our reporting structure. Fourth, the technology environment which we should create. Fifth is to be able to, understand the 360-degree aspect of audit. Sixth is to plan a particular audit and give it due respect. And seventh and final is to quantify the audit in the right manner. It is when we get these steps done is we can move to the journey of moving from internal audit to artificial intelligence. So now is the part where we will end up looking at our journey to AI. So we looked at the earlier steps which we saw and understood, and those are essential for us to migrate to artificial intelligence. Now, but before we go into what is artificial intelligence needs to be defined, because it's misunderstood and it is the buzzword today. So it's better that we understand what is artificial intelligence before we move forward. So the basic definition of artificial intelligence is are the ability of a machine or an application or a robo or a website to replicate human behavior and human intelligence. This is the base level definition which all of us should understand and appreciate. And if we buy into this, this is the exact journey which we will be discussing, because its ability to of machines to be able to replicate our thought processes, which is called artificial intelligence. Uh, I think the screen is hung for me for some reason. Am I on the call?
Yes, Rajesh, the screen is on. Maybe you may have to just reshare it.
Sure. Yeah. Is it fine now?
Yes, it's been working
Yeah.
now.
So when we move to AI, the first thing is to what comes to mind, and November 2022 changed it for all of us, because we as retail or consumers got to know of AI at first hand when we all experienced ChatGPT in our respective laptops or phones or tablets as they may be. So this became the phenomena of using ChatGPT became AI for all of us in the larger sense. And of course, the capabilities that has been built by ChatGPT, which Microsoft has funded, is phenomenal in terms of the ability to deliver any output. And if you try building an internal audit checklist or ask for risk in a particular area or look at what are the controls that should be there in a particular area, ChatGPT will give you an answer very quickly. Whether it's correct or not, nobody can guarantee. Obviously, the information there is also dated, but it will indeed give you an answer to what you need to know. But the question is that it is a learning instrument, and therefore the data that you share is also getting used by several people. That is how the engine becomes better. And so, in my view, I feel that in within the networks of any organizations, ChatGPT should not be allowed to be accessed. Of course, there are bring your own devices in which you can experiment with ChatGPT. But even in those, I would recommend that we ask our employees to be very careful in sharing what information is being put there, because ultimately it's a public space and the data will be taken. In fact, there are warnings within ChatGPT. If you use ChatGPT after about 3 months of November 22, there are clear warnings now from January onwards, where they have said that any data that you share will become part of ChatGPT and will be used. So we need to be very careful on this, and therefore I have recommended that we should not have within our networks, we should not be able to access ChatGPT, and outside of that we can do. But this is not what we are talking about today, because this is, as I said, the easiest step to create an output for us and say that, okay, we are using artificial intelligence. Obviously, we are, there's no doubt. But what we are here today is to understand the journey within the organization to move from internal audit to artificial intelligence. And just to reiterate what I said earlier, one of some of the base level things that we need is to have a sound workflow. We have to have a data lake which we can access, and we should have already built robotics so that certain tasks are automated. When we then use an engine, it will help us to understand any aspect of internal audit and give us outputs. Once we have this base level, the use case of internal artificial intelligence in internal audit is quite large. When we look at future of IA, it is indeed artificial intelligence, because if we look at the three questions that we ask ourselves, can risk assessment be done based on the data within the organization by a machine? Can observations be made as they happen and therefore can they be avoided? Can report writing be fully automated through generative AI? I think in the future, because these answers, all of these questions have the same answer, that it is indeed possible, audit and compliance will merge together. Now, why do I say that? Because regulatorily, we are required to have two separate wings, specifically in a bank, and it is going to happen in the non-banking space soon, non-banking financial space soon. So if we look at the aspect of having two separate functions, it was because we could not sort of make a policy and test it immediately. And therefore, compliance was given the task of approving policies and internal audit the task of checking those policies and controls. Now, if you have a machine which will be able to not only put in place policies and say that these policies are compliant with what we have done in the past, it will make better policies, and audit will be able to come and test it out immediately through its engines by putting it in the data lakes in the organization. Those engines will work within the organization. So one has to imagine a chat GPT working proprietarily in our organizations and giving us outputs in real time. And this is exactly why, in my view, even regulation in future will respect this and say that it can, both functions can ultimately report to one entity or one person, like it was the case about 15, 16 years back. So the future of internal audit will be merging of compliance and audit in a framework by using artificial intelligence to the hilt. So the question is that Are we required as internal auditors? Artificial intelligence and the debate over what will happen to people uh, is very interesting. And I'm a keen student of history. There's this famous picture in of New York where in 1918 they show that there are horse carriages in Manhattan as it existed then, with the buildings also very old, and there is a change to the situation 20 years hence in 1938, just before the World War, where it is full of the Model T of Ford. So the question is that did the people who rode horses change their mindset to be able to become drivers of the future? The answer is even then there would have been a doubt that those who are the drivers of the horse carriages, will they lose their jobs? But what if they reskill themselves? There will be no reason to worry. And that is how audit will change. In fact, we will need to reskill ourselves because the demands of our own reporting authorities, which is the audit committee and the management, will become very, very pointed to say that you need to really come out and be apt to match the pace at which the business is moving. All businesses are going to adopt AI in some form or the other. In many organizations, that changeover has started happening. And if I can look at the big three software giants in India, each of them in each of their quarterly releases always says that in all the projects they're doing now, the AI element is omnipresent. And that is what will happen to us as well. Therefore, not only do we have to be ready to adapt AI in internal audit, but we have to be ready to check the quality of AI in the business or the operations, because that is how it will change soon. And there can't be any function which is outside of the purview of internal audit. So we need to move on to that, and therefore not to worry. Our jobs are very safe and sound for the future. I just want to put it into a few steps so that we can all take away these steps to move to, the path to artificial intelligence. First is to, change our mindset. As I said, not to fear that artificial intelligence in some way is going to take away our jobs. We need to change our mindset that it should help us to create the environment which we want in within the organization. And in this context, I must frankly share, when I set out to do this presentation, I had my thought process ready, which you see in the written form in this presentation. But when I started doing it in the new PowerPoint, which is there in Windows 11, it speaks at the back end, I think, to DALI, which is their artificial intelligence software, and gives you superb outputs, which you see on the right hand side of the screen. I had to just put these steps which I believed in, and the moment I typed robotics, it suggested this image to me. And that is the power of AI. So we need to collaborate with AI to make our presentations uh, to be of a great quality, like I have done here. Similarly, internal audit also needs to use AI to make its internal audit more incisive and precise. Second step in this itself, once we change our mindset, is to be able to access the internal databases. And my preference here is to access them directly to create our independence from the business. Second step to uh, the whole process is to have an audit workflow which has adequate data stored of internal audit so that there can be learning by any machine that we choose to use. The third aspect is to build robotics. Therefore, we automate certain tasks in internal audit. And then in the fourth step, we build policies of the organization into decision-making tools so that audit becomes very real time. The fifth aspect is to identify issues as it happens through this embedded machinery in policy making. And the quality of artificial intelligence should be to be able to find a potential risk based on progression of the risk within an organization. And it is this which will add the most value to our managements and our audit committee. And final step is to continuously do step 4 and 5 here so that we are able to be incisive in the kind of checks we do. One overbearing aspect is what I said earlier, that businesses are going to move to artificial intelligence. We soon need to have mechanics as internal auditors to be able to check that aspect. And like when internal audit, when businesses move to robotics, we too understood robotics as internal audit functions, and therefore we were able to check whether the robotics is delivering consistently. We will need to check whether artificial intelligence is also working consistently within an organization. So that's the difference between, and I'll just simplify it for you at this stage so that the concept becomes clearer. Robotics will mean, just let's take a example of a call center. If you do a transaction, you get a call immediately to check whether you have done the transaction and you reaffirm to the fact that you have done that transaction. Many banks use this. It's become common play and it is robotics. But the element of artificial intelligence will be, okay, this is Rajesh Nair. In the beginning of the month, he does these 4 transactions. We have been able to see him do these 4 transactions all the time so that we will not call him when he does these 4 transactions at the beginning of the month. But if his behavior pattern changes and he does this on the 10th of the month, the call will go. So that's the difference between robotics. Robotics is one size fit all. Artificial intelligence will enable intelligence to come in and therefore customize the delivery to the customer. And imagine some of the times when we do a lot of transactions at the beginning of the month, it is irritating to get those calls, isn't it? So that's how progression will happen. And this is where we come in to be able to check these aspects. In this example itself, you need to check whether the rules are working consistently and ever changing rules. Therefore, is it missing out on huge risks that we would miss, even though we are in artificial intelligence in the organization, and therefore audit needs to check it. In conclusion, I think AI is here to stay, and therefore we need to adapt to AI, not only adapt to AI, but also adopt AI to be able to check it in our own businesses. Therefore, there is no question that we need to reskill ourselves, understand this better. If we are at a stage which is very, very basic and we are in using Excel like databases, we need to migrate to workflows and have a technology architecture which is going to help us become uh, become a stepping stone to artificial intelligence. As far as our positioning goes, I would recommend we should become the doctors of the organization so that we are respected like we respect a doctor and are consulted for any issues that may arise in the businesses. And that is the greatest respect that internal audit function can have. And finally, quantification of risks and quantification of audit observations based on that risk is extremely important when we build any of the aspects, whether it's robotics, artificial intelligence, or checking any regulatory compliances. So with this, I'm here to take any questions if you have any. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rajesh, for sharing your knowledge and experiences. There are a few questions which has been come up, so I would like to take one after the other so that you can answer them live. So first question we have is, in your past experience as an internal audit leader, can you share some examples regarding audit automation that and the mindset or the challenges and how you were able to overcome over those things?
Yeah, very interesting question. In fact, you know, when we started about our journey of automating our own internal audit, we and the experiences I had, what we looked at is that we too were having a lot of our checklists in Excel form in the beginning stages. So first step we did is that the rule that I said, the 64,000 rows that you had, and later on it became far more rows in Excel. Each item of control and each item of what will we check was separated and segregated. So rather than having 8 points that we will check, we would be looking at every aspect as a separate item within that Excel row. I'm just going to the brass tacks of how we did it so that you all understand it in more minuteness. Once we did this, so if you look at, say, you are checking retail liabilities in a branch, and there you are going to check the aspect of, since we took PAN as an example, let's continue with that, that there will be various mechanics of PAN check. One is the basic, whether you have PAN or not. Second will be, has there been any transactions greater than 1 million where PAN was not taken? So such controls you have to segregate in the Excel sheet as two aspects. And that is what enables automating finally. So the first step is to, as I call it, bring it down to the brass tacks so that it becomes programmable in future. And once you get it in this fashion, then through SQL, you can add robotics through the data scientists and have this checked periodically so that you will say, okay, every October 20th, you will run this and give me the output of what has happened from October 1st to 19th. So that's how you automate, and you will get these reports periodically, PAN bank or PAN company. So that's the journey to automate an observation. I've just given you a small example of PAN related, but you have to do this to all the controls.
Okay, noted. So can I go to the next one?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is from one of the international participants. So the question over here is, how could you come up with the idea that audit and compliance will be merged in further? What factors that input to get this conclusion?
Yeah, as I said, when you have an aspect of real-time checking which is feasible in an institution, ultimately, what is compliance? Compliance's role is to put in place policies and frameworks to check whether the regulatory guidelines is institutionalized within an organization. Obviously, there is a compliance monitoring aspect which has got added over time. But when you look at the functions itself, once you have artificial intelligence enabling real-time observations coming up, the roles will merge. And therefore, I feel that in future, and this is my proposition, that regulations will also respect it, knowing fully well that there is no sort of conflict in merging the two. And therefore, at the highest level, they may end up merging, is what I meant. So there will be obviously a compliance function and audit function, but today they are not allowed to even merge at any levels within an organization, especially in banks. So that aspect is likely to change as time comes by, and both will collaborate to make both their functions better and faster. That's how I foresee artificial intelligence changing this aspect in future.
Okay, that's what great. So my next question here, which is on from the audience which has come. So they've asked us, can you give any examples for issues which can be identified before it happens from the audit perspective?
Yeah. So, so the key aspect which artificial intelligence will bring in is to be able to foresee, if we continue on the path that, if you are looking at, say we onboard, and let me stick to one example, otherwise things get complicated. Say you are onboarding a million.
Sorry,
Hello,
Rajesh, we
am I
lost your
audible?
voice.
Yeah,
Yes, yes. Now you're
yeah,
audible.
yeah, yes.
You may have to please start
So I
from.
was saying, just to repeat, I was saying that let me stay with the example of PAN itself to make the example easier, which is the permanent account number and used by the income tax authorities. If you have a aspect that you are onboarding, say, a million accounts a month, and the error rate in PAN population is at about 10%, you can project to the business that what will happen to them in a year, and also as a result, how much of cost it will take to be able to get those PANs at the speed at which we are onboarding. Because if you have this kind of scale and 10% of accounts do not have PAN being populated, by the end of the year, it will be 1.2 million accounts that don't have PAN. And therefore, the magnitude of the risk that an organization will face will be higher. And that is how potential risk has to be even done even today in the manual world or the robotics world as we are. Same thing will dovetail when artificial intelligence comes. The ability to foresee a risk which will outline itself based on the past is this fine ability that we need to build as auditors. And that becomes a probable risk that we will have in such an institution. There are chances of a regulatory action being taken because there are so many accounts. Not only the percentage, but the quantum will be so high. And therefore, it becomes a probable risk area.
Okay. I had actually similar question. I think that has already been answered. I would just like to share the question with you. So it was like, how do identify issues before it happens using AI or ML? Can you share some examples? So I
Yeah.
would assume that it is same, but you would like to add something more, Rajesh here?
Yeah, I can add here because I purposely put this example. The person who's asked the question, I hope you understood the call center example I gave. You know, uh, when as auditors, you will check that in robotics, in a call center, we will set up a threshold that every transaction above 50,001 rupee will get a call and where the customer will confirm. So if that is the base level of check, which we will do, and that can be easily automated because it's a very easy solution to implement, provided everything is automated as I outlined in the presentation. Now comes the area of creating the complexity of understanding a customer behavior and changing the rules dynamically. And this is where businesses will use artificial intelligence to make it convenient for the customer. Now, in that complexity, how do you uh, check whether what was to be done was done properly or not? Because it's an ever-changing evolutionary mechanism based on the learning that the engine has of customer behavior. So our expertise is to understand what is the consistency of because in banking and other institutions, consistency will matter in financial transactions. So this is how you will have to go into the depth of it and then understand what has really happened and has the rule worked consistently or not. That is the insight you will get.
Okay, that is great, Rajesh. So next question is, how different is AI than ML and RPA?
So I don't understand RPA honestly. So I don't know what that means. If you can throw any light, whoever has asked the question. But machine learning is to make things simpler and faster. It doesn't have the ability of, AI in a way has several aspects of it in when you look at it. So ML is a subset of AI, wherein the machine learning is something which needs inputs from human beings to be able to learn. And that is how the machine learning aspect happens, whereas AI will be autonomous to that extent and go ahead by itself. I don't understand the term RPA, so you'll have to clarify to me what that means.
Yeah, 1 minute, I'm just checking. It is robotic process automation.
Oh, okay. So, so that I thought I made that clear in my previous answer also. Robotics is simply doing the same thing in a automated fashion. Machine learning is going to throw up certain aspects to the users to be able to program for the future. Artificial intelligence is having this being done autonomously and replicating the human brain, so to say. So these are the three stages.
Okay, thanks, Rajesh. So next question we have is, what has been the biggest challenge with the auditees or the companies adopting the AI in the audit?
So, frankly speaking, I have not seen adoption of AI as much in organizations, but this is uh, because that's simply because businesses are just moving to AI in a big way. As I said, it's not present today, but why do we as internal audit need to move to it? because we cannot be left behind, because business will move like this when the time comes, and we cannot have a particular area outside our purview. So that's the reason that we need to adapt to AI and adopt it both ways to understand our businesses and the AI they are using, plus use it in our own function to make our audits more incisive. So that's the reason. It's early stages. And this is from my commentary of, I follow the big three software giants externally as well as internally. The use case of AI moving to control functions is just at a beginning stage all over. And even businesses using AI has just started the journey. So the use case and the errors that will happen in future will make our job tough to identify such issues. And that is where we need to build our competence proactively.
Okay. Next question is, do we have other apps or systems other than ChatGPT which can be used in audits?
So, as I said, I am not uh, somebody who is going to propagate that we use open sources within a network. So each one has the Google Bard. Everybody is developing AI which are on when open to all. What needs to happen is that you need to speak to your technology counterparts within your respective organizations and some of the technology software providers to help you in this move to build AI into first the data lakes, and therefore how will you use it. So I for one will never recommend any open source to be used within a network because of the perils of having access to too much of data and not knowing the governance mechanisms in great detail.
Yes, thanks, Rajesh. So there are two more questions for you, Rajesh. How should we report to audit committee when management have itself come up with high level risk of issues in process, as you said in doctors on call? This seems to be little
Yeah,
operation.
sure. So this is very important that, as I said, in the three-step process to branding ourselves as doctors, the self-disclosures need to be respected, what come from the business. The mechanism to follow is to be able to uh, report it as it is and agree to the risk. So if it is very high risk and high risk, indeed it should come within the audit framework as self-identified by business. So they should be given full credit to disclose something like this to us and having identified it and working upon it already. The reason to bring it within the audit framework is because it is very high risk and high risk. Therefore, you should be clear that you will track its closure and the mechanics of how it is closed. So that is why you need to bring it, but give it as you should in fact have a separate descriptor to saying as self-identified very high risk items, which are work in progress, and the timeline is say December 31st. And that is what you should be tracking, giving due weightage to the business of having done so.
Okay. So Rajesh, next question is something on the cooperative bank and it's on the risk management system. So I would like to share that question with you and you can let us know if you would want to, how do you want to address this? How can we
Sure.
build risk management system for risk-based internal audit, specifically for cooperative banks here in India? What sort of skill set is required within the audit department?
So my recommendation, I have never sort of studied a cooperative bank honestly, but I do understand that in terms of technology, etc., maybe there are many journeys for them to cross in such a scenario, and assuming that technologically they are just not there. As I said, if we have to start from Excel, we must take it up and draw up an action plan based on that Excel itself to first see what is the business, then understand what are the risks to the business. And in risks, the only way to identify risks is to be able to have a perfect understanding of the business. If we don't understand the business, our abilities to identify what is the risk in the business will be very low. So the first step for you is to know the business, how it runs. If the business is not automated, then there are a lot of risks that come up with it. So you will dovetail those first, that since we don't have systems to, say, run a deposit franchise or a loan franchise, as the case may be, we will be have we will have to sort of identify those risks first, and then see that what are the controls, whether they've used the old method of four eyes within the audit framework to identify any to mitigate the risks. And therefore, you will have to check at the basics, that is the four eye concept working on the ground consistently. So your base level will itself reduce from what I presented today automatically. And that's how then the organization will have its own journeys. As it takes its journeys, you will need to understand the risks that uh, are there in that business. And therefore, my suggestion is, if a cooperative bank is moving towards automation and internal audit is behind, you must adopt to a workflow. And that is important because that will make your output systematic. You will have risk templates which are designed to ready-made risk templates in many of these softwares which are there, which you can easily use and change to your organization's requirements.
Okay. I have a last question from the pool which I have got. It's on the sampling side. The question is,
Yeah.
what is more effective when it comes to internal audit sampling? Should it be a statical or a non-statical sampling?
So I'm possibly, since I have a business role, I have been in compliance and internal audit. I always say that I prefer the 360-degree approach, because statistical methodology says that, if you check 30 samples and the error you find in it, you can sort of put it to the entire population of the data. That's what it says. But in my own experience, this is something of the past. That means we are at a very nascent level of audit. We need to be able to check the entire universe and create exceptions and report and take corrective action. That to me is true and effective way of doing sampling.
Yes. Yeah, I think we are done with the questions. So let us just look at if there are any more questions. So any more questions, please do write to us in the Q&A section. We will give 2 more minutes. So all the questions were which had come up, Rajesh, has been addressed, and you have taken up all the questions well.
Yeah.
I think there's one more. Just let me just quickly check this. Yeah, there's one which has come, which is AI models require continuous monitoring, updates, or maintenance. Don't we think neglecting these aspects can lead to degraded performance or vulnerability? Also, relying heavily on AI can also lead to a complacency.
Complacency, you mean? I think so.
Yeah, because
No, you're absolutely right. Just because it's like saying that and let me take the example I gave, the horse carriage moving to cars, and today, 100 years later, we are talking about autonomous driving cars. Even today, despite the technological advancement and the GPS systems and the way the US roadways is mapped, still the guidelines of driving say that the driver has to sit on the driver's seat, and there cannot be a situation where you cannot be awake when the car is moving. So, so obviously you need continuous monitoring, and that is why I'm stressing that the move to AI for internal audit is not only existential, it is about being able to do your roles effectively, because businesses will move, because businesses' job is to make profits, cut costs to the efficient manner, and increase the profitability of the business. And they will take steps because artificial intelligence will expand the horizon of the business they do, like the couple of examples we discussed. And therefore, audit will also have to move in tandem to be able to check those aspects. And that is where the true value will be, because audit can never be left behind from where the organization is moving.
Yes, thanks, Rajesh. I think we are good with whatever the questions that come we have addressed. And I would like to thank you, Rajesh, for sharing your knowledge and experiences, which helped us to understand the role and technology in the modern internal audit. So the takeaway for us is the technology is must, and the right usage of those technology in internal audit will lead us to a great extent.